Hello and welcome back to another episode of Armchair Analysts, the only podcast that tried to gatecrash Lionel Messi's barbecue. My name is Cameron MacDonald, and I spent 3 years working as an FA licensed intermediary here in the UK. My co-host, Rupert Meadows, has written and broadcast about all things football on platforms such as TalkSport Radio and Good News Sport. But above all else, we're fans.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cam. The first leg of the European semi-finals have now been played with everything still to play for in each tie, except perhaps the 8-goal festival held between Manchester United and Roma. But where the midweek was all about football, the weekend was all about protest. Several clubs, players and football organisations held a social media blackout to protest against abuse and discrimination, whilst the latest in the long line of fan protests saw the tie between United and Liverpool postponed. As always, timestamps are in the description, and let's start off by looking at that protest held outside Old Trafford on the Sunday.
Yeah, so this is the first game in Premier League history to be postponed by fan protest. And what a message that sends, particularly given that, Manchester United versus Liverpool is almost definitely the largest fixture in English football. I think maybe there's a period of time, back in the early 90s and mid-90s where you could have said Manchester United versus Arsenal when it was sort of United would win 2 and then Arsenal would win 1. So it was often sort of a league decider. But over the history of English football, easily it's got to be Manchester United versus Liverpool. Of course, this isn't the first time that a game has been postponed at Old Trafford in the Premier League. I remember there was that really weird, seemed serious at the time and then ended up becoming comical postponement in 2015-16 when Bournemouth came to Old Trafford because they thought they'd found a bomb there, but what it turned out had happened is that it had been a training exercise by a company that finds and diffuses bombs, had left one of their example bombs at the ground. They were like, oh my god, and it turned out to be the security company had left one behind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only people that came out of that situation with any sort of glamour were the people that make the fake bombs.
yeah, exactly. They're like, well, I mean, good product. But no, so the protest was really interesting. It started off, very similar to a lot of the protests we've seen around a lot of these other Super League clubs recently. We've seen very similar with Arsenal, Chelsea and Liverpool, certainly. These huge crowds just assembling to protest not only the club's involvement in the Super League, but certainly in Arsenal's case, and I suppose to an extent Liverpool and not so much Chelsea, but the state of the ownership. The difference here, chiefly, was that the protest took somewhat of a turn as some fans managed to the term that's been used is storm the pitch, and as much as I enjoy that sort of image of United fans heroically storming the pitch, realistically there are a lot of young kids as well as there were people of all ages, but like some young kids were able to get through a gate and get on the pitch. It wasn't as militaristically explosive as some people would have you believe. But still, people managed to trespass and get onto the pitch, and there was a very small number of isolated incidences of violence and property damage. What I would want to start off by saying is that obviously it'd be remiss for me to not talk about the fact that there was violence and a bit of property damage and criminal damage and all that. I think it's key to stress that this was the vast minority. The majority of fans didn't even get into the pitch. A lot of people who were at the protest didn't even know there were people on the pitch. And even within the people who got onto the pitch, there was a minority within the minority that were inciting violence and causing criminal damage. So, you're going to see a lot of stuff over the course of this week, and will have seen it since the weekend, of people trying to sort of discredit the whole protest as, football hooligans at it again. Of course, there were some people who took it a bit too far. I think the vast majority of fans there were peacefully protesting with their full legal right and not doing anything wrong. But obviously, as with any group of large people, there's always going to be a couple of people who take it that bit too far.
Yeah, definitely. And as is often the case as well, it gets defined by the extremists within the group rather than, the large majority of the people that were there on the day.
Yeah, like I said, for myself and us talking about this, it'd be an oversight and just ignoring part of it to not talk about the fact that these things happened. But they, for me anyway, and for anyone who's really looking at it, by no way defined the protest. I think the protest was much more meaningful and larger than that, and the vast majority of people didn't get involved. But nonetheless, it's still worth noting. Something else worth noting I thought that was quite interesting was that it was Sky Sports who were covering the Manchester United versus Liverpool game, at least here in England, and so subsequently were covering sort of the things as they unfolded, which gave rise to some very awkward moments as you sort of had the studio of Graham Souness, Roy Keane and Micah Richards sort of just sitting there trying to fill dead air for an hour and a half. I think Micah Richards, I've never seen him less talkative.
I mean, in terms of people that you want to spend an hour and a half with, I feel like Graham Souness has got to be somewhere near the bottom of the list.
Well, I think it was quite funny because Graham Souness, I was sort of almost comforted by the coverage that he was giving because I thought everyone else, quite interestingly, obviously you had Gary Lineker and Jamie Carragher there, but in the studio you had Micah Richards and Roy Keane. Both seemed pretty supportive of the whole protest thing. Obviously, everyone did what I've just done and sort of disclaimer, condemn violence and criminal damage, but they all seemed pretty supportive. And I was almost sort of weirdly comforted that Graham Souness had gone back to having just ass-tier takes, because for the last couple of weeks he's come out with a couple of salient points about the Super League, and I've sort of been like, is up down, is left right. Graham Souness is making sense. So
it's nice reassuring, safe territory. Graham Souness is an idiot again. Good.
I was weirdly comforted by it, you know what I mean?
I don't know exactly what you mean, and for those of you who don't know what he did say, I think the main thing that he came out with was this suggestion that the reason why Manchester United fans are protesting is because of, recent lack of success at the club, rather than, the fact that this goes back 15 years to all the way back to when the Glazers took over, and this is, just one in a long line of protests to that effect.
Yeah, I think his almost verbatim line was, "Oh, you weren't protesting like this when you were winning trophies," to which every single United fan, and indeed most people who have watched football, even if you're not a United fan, were going, "Well, that's not true, mate." Even in some of their most successful eras, in 2005, when they were still winning leagues on the regular, a lot of fans were, getting very annoyed at one of the most iconic sort of, green and gold things, all those green and gold scarves and flags, is literally David Beckham wearing one at the height of some of United's power. So I just thought that was, at best, irresponsible reporting, and at worst, just plainly ignorant. But other than that, I thought it was kind of interesting that Sky Sports had a pretty favourable coverage of it, because Sky Sports were, this was a protest meant to strike at the hearts of the Glazers, and, it definitely did do that. But arguably the biggest losers in this situation of the game not being televised were Sky Sports themselves. Obviously, they had other games on in that day, but the crown jewel of the day of football, and of the weekend of football indeed, because as we discussed, it's, one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game in English football, was this United-Liverpool match that got postponed. So I thought it was quite interesting that they didn't sort of have like a camera cut to the one pundit you could find who liked the Super League, so they can go, I didn't like the Super League when Sky Sports weren't getting involved, but now that their bottom line's threatened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, if I'm putting my cynical hat on, it's all to do with, they're desperately trying to rebrand themselves as being for the fans, and being, I guess, a platform for good. So they kind of had to let, people take swipes at them while they lost millions. And that in itself was quite fun to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it definitely was interesting to sort of see this, a situation where they lost out, for them to be like, look at this, isn't the right to protest great? And I'm sure there are a bunch of executives with clenched fists standing just behind the cameras.
I'm absolutely sure.
Manchester United Supporters Trust came out, and Supporters Trust have been such a great voice in this period. It's been great to sort of have, a centralised, or all of the different major clubs have had this sort of good voice to come out and represent the club, for the most part, in my opinion, in a really good light. Manchester United Supporters Trust penned an open letter to the Glazers following the protest, in which they said, amongst other things, let's be very clear that no one wants what happened at Old Trafford yesterday to be a regular event. But what happened was the culmination of 16 years in which your family's ownership of the club has driven us into debt and decline, and we felt ever more sidelined and ignored. And I think that this is where the Manchester United protests have differed most from pretty much all of the protests that we've seen, aside from maybe the Arsenal ones and maybe to a degree the Liverpool ones, but I could be wrong here, but I don't feel like there's been an ongoing Liverpool sentiment against John W. Henry and FSG, over the last couple of years. I think a lot of the other fans involved in this have been angry at their owners because of the Super League, whereas for United fans in this protest, the Super League was sort of just like the final straw, or I think not even the final straw. I think the final straw was a long time ago, but it was just yet another offence to the rap sheet that the Glazers have sort of had against United fans in their perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say, I think Arsenal fans have this in common with Man U fans, because they also have been long protesting the ownership of Stan Kroenke. And for much the same reasons, clubs falling into disrepair, and the fans are being left by the wayside. There was something really nice and fitting, I thought, about the fact that the match got postponed due to the fans. Just, again, disclaimers aside, I just enjoyed that fans can have that impact still, even if it's illegal. I don't know. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this one had sparks of illegal behaviour. I had a chat with a mate who's a little bit better versed in the legal profession than I am, and asked him sort of if there are avenues that would be able to postpone a game legally. And he said, there are if you sort of organise it in a certain way and don't cause any criminal damage or unrest, if you were to just sort of gather around the hotel, as some of the fans did gather around the Lowry on this day. And I thought, yeah, as you said, it was very fitting that the fans were the ones who got the game called off, because, not to put too fine a point on it, but the real argument, the core argument that all fans have shared, whether they're fans of Super League clubs, whether they're fans of the clubs that weren't part of the Super League, the whole argument, the core thesis that everyone has shared is that football is nothing without the fans. And I think that was empirically proved by the fact that the fans said, you're not playing a game today, and the game wasn't played. And I quite enjoyed, the very literal sort of bringing to life of that sentiment.
Yeah, so I was interested. I was reading an interview with Jeff Pearson in The Independent, who apparently is one of England's foremost researchers on football crowds, which I did not know was a thing. And one point that he made, which I found interesting, was he said the stadium should be a fortress. And I get that. I completely understand the sentiment from a practical perspective, and these days from a COVID perspective as well. But just given how the game was stopped, it did just ring with the sense of like, fans shouldn't be able to influence the club, and fans going, yes, we can. We still absolutely can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it is interesting now to see what happens, because for me, it felt like this protest had the potential to be a real turning point. We've had all manner of fan protests before across the league. We've had sort of, as we've seen with all these other clubs very recently, but in recent years as well, fans protesting outside the ground. We've had different sets of fans walking out in the middle of the game. Obviously, that's not something that's possible at the moment because fans aren't at the game, but it's something we've seen. And it's never really seen change. Newcastle fans have done that, I think, maybe once, maybe twice they've walked out in the middle of the game to protest the ownership of Mike Ashley. He's still there, swilling his beers and driving the club into disrepair. Similarly, the Glazers, similarly, the Cronkies. Whereas this is the first time that an impact of this size has been made, in my mind, to the active detriment of the Premier League and Sky Sports and potentially Manchester United themselves. It's key to note that although the FA are able to award Liverpool the game on these grounds, because you can attribute the blame of, United's fans to United and so say, well, okay, it's in the FA regulations, they can do that. According to the Mirror, Liverpool have made the decision not to ask the FA to award them the game and will instead work with Manchester United to find a date for the fixture to be completed, which is, good sportsmanship in and of itself. It would have been very easy for them to go, yoink, but it would also hand the title to Man City, so maybe that...
Yeah, I mean, I also guess the other part of it is, Liverpool hierarchy and Manchester United hierarchy have been scheming together for almost a year now with all of these plans like the European Super League and the big project, big picture and all that stuff. So, I'm quite confident that they've tied themselves to each other for some time now, and they just like, once they're done with their 5 minutes of high-fiving before the meeting, they'll probably get down to deciding that it's none of their faults and they'll just play the match again. But yeah, I guess the other part to mention, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit more about social media abuse and Black Lives Matter later on, but this sentiment really, really struck a chord with me for all the protests on Black Lives Matter last year when people were criticising the way in which people protested. And, they just turn around and say, well, you had a problem with it when an NFL player knelt in protest and nothing changed. So these Man U fans have been protesting for 16 years and nothing is changing. I personally, yes, I don't, I'm not condoning the violence, as neither of us are, but what do you do if you keep protesting peacefully and nothing changes when it means this much to you?
Well, exactly. And I'm not condoning it either for a second, but you can understand why it got to that point. You can sympathise why a group of people, this is not like, United fans have tried to protest for the first time and their voice hasn't been heard and they've gone, oh, well, the Premier League came out and they made a statement and they said, fans have other avenues available to air their grievances. And that's true, but fans have been using those avenues for years and years and years to no avail. Finally here, perhaps a little bit, unceremoniously and with a little bit of, criminal intent, they have made their voice heard. And that's not to condone it, but I do get why people felt that was their only resort. And it is interesting to think now, is this going to see further games postponed by dissatisfied fans? Because fans have seen now that, they can make the league bleed and they can make their teams bleed. Are there going to be further games that see the same sort of thing? And I think it depends how much you attribute the postponement to the actual invasion of the pitch and how much of it was the fans sort of surrounding the Lowry Hotel. Carl Anker, the journalist, was at the protest in his capacity both as a journalist and a United fan, and he was sort of interviewing fellow protesters and gauging the mood of the event. And he sort of commented that from where he was, the protest was not only peaceful, but it was so civil as to be family friendly. There were sort of dads there with their kids and the whole families were there. And the images that were being posted on mainstream media of sort of drunken fans having fistfights was a real misrepresentation of what 90% of the wider protest was like. He also pointed out that as he was there and fans were being shepherded away by police, there were a few different chants of people going, "You'll play when we decide and we can do this every week," which kind of begs the question. Will they do this every week? Will they keep sort of, knocking United back? Because as it stands, finding a place for this game is a headache enough with limited time left in the league calendar. Each additional game that gets postponed will be exponentially troublesome to the league and to the team.
Well, exactly, and I completely agree. Yeah, it's not. A lot has been made to try and make it seem like this is fans throwing their toys out the pram, and it's absolutely not. And I almost am asking myself, will it happen? I'm asking myself, should it happen? I kind of think, keep doing it. As long as you can do it in a safe way, make your voices heard. Stuff needs to change, and change is not easy. So I'm kind of all for it. I mean, the other part I would say is that, one of the reasons why all of these fans ended up being in this incredibly tight, enclosed area is because the stadium decided to close off like one of the main areas is for the fans, which is this big forecourt outside the stadium. And this forecourt is, has kind of almost the same power as that "You'll Never Walk Alone" symbol does in Liverpool. It's a symbol of the fans. That area is for the fans. And then the fact that it got closed off for the supporters was a clear message from the hierarchy. And also, I kind of think, partly their fault for what happened, because it got more unrest-y because, they were being forced into this really tight space.
Yeah, definitely. And I think obviously that combined with the fact that people have definitely missed out on that sort of match day atmosphere, and this will have had sort of an aspect of that, seeing other people wearing the same shirt. And a lot of the chants you could see from the videos weren't just about Glazers out, but there were chants about Ole, there were chants about former United players. People were sort of getting into the match day spirit despite not being able to actually, watch the game in the ground themselves. But I think, it's definitely very interesting where this will take us next, because Oliver Kay sort of wrote on Monday about this. He said that the Super League has unleashed something in English football. Anger undoubtedly, but also an air of revolution, a fresh desire to reclaim a game that has been taken further and further from its original purpose. And I think that's a very interesting quote, because not only is it true that the Super League has done that, I think this protest will have only stoked those flames further, because what we've seen here is a victory for protesters. Their message was communicated, the event was the top story on all of UK's major news networks on Sunday and Monday, and, as we spoke about earlier, the call that fans have been making, football is nothing without the fans, was empirically proven here. It was proven that if the fans don't want you to play, you cannot play, and they'll take it to that extreme if they need to, and will.
Absolutely. Long live the revolution. Shall we move into this week's guessing game?
Let's indeed. You've got one for me.
I do. I have 3 clues for you. I will tell them now. So this player, in his youth, could have been a professional skier before opting to become a professional footballer instead. And his brother plays for Bayern Munich. So that's your first clue.
Cool.
Your second clue is that he has the 4th most ever caps for Germany.
Okay.
And the third clue is that he played for one club for 15 years before joining a Premier League side towards the end of his career.
I think I know who, and he won Premier League club
He's only ever played for one Premier League club.
after being at a. You didn't say what the 15 years club was. I mean, I'm assuming it's Bundesliga.
No, I didn't.
But,
No, that was not a clue afforded to you.
Okay, cool. I think I know who this is, but we'll see. Okay, looking at us next, we've got a story that came out today, actually, which was that Jose Mourinho, 15 days after losing the job at Spurs, has been appointed Roma manager. In a trend that seems to be becoming more and more common, he was appointed in advance. He won't actually take charge until the beginning of next season. But it's a really interesting situation.
Yeah, it is. So obviously, Roma have a manager currently, which is Paulo Fonseca, and Roma are in just a really weird place as a club. I mean, if you look at the Serie A table at the moment, they sit 9 points off 6th place with a game more played than 6th place. So, it's a club that really need change, and apparently they've decided that Jose Mourinho is the man to lead them through that change.
Yeah, which is weird because we spoke about how, when we were talking about the future of Spurs, how we talked about if Spurs are going to have a rebuild, maybe one of the first things they need to do is jettison Mourinho. And so Roma have looked at Mourinho and gone, okay, he'll be the person we need to rebuild us. Roma, for reference to anyone who's not familiar with Serie A, are currently 7th place. They could very easily fail to qualify for even the Europa League this season. Sassuolo are just 2 points behind them with 4 games to play. And even though they're not technically out of the Europa League yet this season, they're 6-2 down, so it's pretty unlikely they'll progress. Football's football, so who knows? It's one of those things that makes me question, because you looked at Spurs' appointment of Mourinho, and I think most people interpreted that as like a sort of Hail Mary, last gasp, let's win a trophy at all costs. And that wasn't an entirely unrealistic goal for Spurs. They did ultimately get to the Carabao Cup final under Mourinho. They had been in the Champions League final, not too long ago under Pochettino. So you thought that he might be the guy who could get them over the line. Roma have not had a similar history, and if your recent history is petty in comparison to Spurs, that's that's not a good place to be. Ironically, their last trophy also came in 2007-8, which is the last time, same time as Spurs, although theirs was the Coppa Italia, which is more like the FA Cup than the Carabao Cup. But you've got to ask, what are their goals for Mourinho here? Surely, I mean, I know that we've just seen Inter Milan win the league and Juventus' supremacy has been toppled. Do they think that Mourinho can take them to a Scudetto, or do they think that he might be part of a rebuild? It's a very confusing appointment to me, both for Roma and for Mourinho, who has just seen how difficult it is as a club where there's a lot to do, instead of walking into a Chelsea or an Inter or a Real Madrid, and he's gone to a club where the job is arguably even harder.
Oh, absolutely, it's harder. Yeah, I think, I guess the only thing I would say is that clearly Tottenham just didn't work for him. For whatever reason, we've definitely intimated before that he's over the hill, but it could also just be that Tottenham is literally like unmanageable. And I could, to an extent, perhaps believe that. So I almost see it as kind of, if you look at, for example, the career of Marcelo Bielsa, he had like 2 days at one club, one game for another. Yeah, and he's now doing great things with Leeds. And I just feel like, there is a chance, there's always a chance that Mourinho could find his fire again, his groove again, with a club that is looking like it's a little bit down and out, rather than can you recapture your old fire? It's kind of, can you find something new with this? And they do have an interesting squad. I mean, they've got a couple of really good young players. Nicolo Zaniolo is like the main one that jumps out.
The joke everyone's been making about him is like Mourinho couldn't get Zaniolo at Spurs, so he just moved to Roma instead.
Well, I mean, stranger things have happened. It could be all right.
It could be all right. It just seems like such an odd matchup for me. As I was reading an article by Gabriel Marcotti earlier on ESPN, and he pointed out that it's going to be a very difficult job for a lot of reasons, particularly since the club is known for its fans regularly turn up outside its training ground. And he said, sometimes to cheer, sometimes not so much. It's also interesting because he's going to be reuniting with 3 different players that he had varying affinity with. Obviously, Chris Smalling and Henrik Mkhitaryan were players under him at United that didn't fare so well. Conversely, Pedro is still there. They played together for 1 year, and it wasn't a year that Chelsea did particularly well, but they enjoyed a good. He's very much a Mourinho player, Pedro, sort of the winger that isn't as fussed about scoring as he is about putting in hard shifts, which I think is like Mourinho's favourite kind of thing. It just seems like a very weird appointment to me. I just wanted to read out my favourite tweet from the situation, which came from Tom Williams, who's the author of the book Do You Speak Football? And he said, Jose Mourinho is appointed the Roma coach a day after the city of Rome announced the renovation of the Colosseum. One is a crumbling monument that once inspired awe, but its best days are well behind it, and the other is the Colosseum.
I mean, that does somewhat say it all, yeah. I just keep finding it really funny because, it felt like towards the end of Mourinho's career at Tottenham, he just wanted to be fired. He was like, I don't want to do this job. I don't want this rebuild. Please fire me. And eventually Tottenham acquiesced. And now Roma turn around and be like, well, you are not escaping the youth. You have to rebuild something.
That's the thing. I don't disagree that there was a part of him that was like, if I can convince them to fire me, I get 15 million and I don't have to be Spurs manager. Win-win. And then he's just
fire me.
How quickly is he going to get fired from this job?
I don't know, man. I mean, I guess the other part is there was a lot of expectation at Tottenham because they were so close to something. Roma were on the way down. And Mourinho, if anything, is a guy who likes the down and out clubs. He loves that underdog siege mentality. It could work. It could work.
Yeah, I mean, you never know in football. This could be a sort of rebranding for Mourinho. It just seems like such a weird fit, especially because tactically he's so different to Fonseca as well. But, we'll have to wait and see. I think it'll be definitely interesting to see Mourinho. We all sort of, even those who hate him, there's a party that loves to hate him and loves to have him in the game as a result. So it's good to have him back in the game.
Oh, definitely. And I could really see, the Roma fans loving him. As you said, they turn up for come rain, come shine to cheer or to boo. And I kind of think Mourinho might relish in that because he does often become a man of the people despite elevating himself in such a weird way.
That's very true. That's very true indeed. Moving into an ongoing and worsening situation concerning professionals in the game receiving abuse online. This weekend saw most sporting teams, bodies and individuals hold a boycott of social media platforms between April the 30th and May the 4th. That's today, so at midnight this morning, the sort of everyone sort of got back on social media. And this followed demands put to social media companies. There were 3 demands issued by the Premier League in unison with everyone, and that was to put stronger preventative and takedown measures in place to stop discriminatory abuse from being sent or seen, to be accountable for safety on their platforms and protect users by implementing effective verification, and to ensure real-life consequences for online discriminatory abuse, ban perpetrators, stop account re-registration, and support law enforcement. So this is something we talked about a little bit back in episode 35. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be uploaded at a later date, but it's available still now on all podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, etc. But it's something we touched on then and something worth revisiting because this is something that, despite the increased media coverage of it, or perhaps because of it, continues to get worse and worse and worse. Just players getting abused, whether it's because of race or gender or religion or anything like that. Just players just getting abused by these anonymous Twitter, Instagram and all those sort of accounts.
True. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say as we're kicking off this conversation is that I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's just getting seen, and I think it's getting talked about.
I would actually slightly disagree with that because we've had people like Ian Wright come out and sort of talk about how in the last few years, it's almost got to fever pitch. And I think it's got to a point. I mean, obviously, a big part of that is that, Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff are relatively new relative to how old someone like Ian Wright is. So it might just be like when he was a player, he didn't get that much abuse because it was just people shouting at him and he was busy playing the game. Whereas now people have like a direct line to message him when he's minding his own business on a Thursday or whatever. But it does seem, to my mind anyway, and you could be right, it could just be that there's more coverage, but it seems to my mind that it's getting worse and more frequent.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think it's potentially getting worse and more frequent on social media, but that's also just potentially because other avenues are getting shut down for these people now. Because I mean,
there's no
Ian
stadium
Wright
to go
had
to.
had an interview with not an interview, but a talk with Alan Shearer. I would really recommend people go and watch it. It was powerful stuff. But he was saying that he used to get shouted abuse all the time.
That's very true. A big part of it may be it might have been so prevalent this season because you can't go to stadiums and sort of abuse, and that's something we touched on a bit last time we talked about this, and also is worth talking about now because a lot of the footballing bodies are trying to sort of shift the blame onto social media companies, and it's definitely true that social media can do better, but there's also a part of me that's like, well, don't just shift the buck, because how many times have we seen, I mean, there's that really famous picture of, I think it's Danny Welbeck and also no, it might be Daniel Sturridge, and a sort of a United fan is doing sort of a monkey thing at him, and players getting racially abused, and loads of fans have been banned. So I think, yeah, it has been there, but I think there's a bit of a difference, not to say one is better or worse, but I think you're more likely to engage with it if it's someone who's DMing you directly rather than someone up at the top of the stadium of a 60,000 seater trying to yell it at you, even if it's the same amount of people doing it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's funny because I agree with you, and it does feel like the last thing in a long line of the Premier League playing hot potato with fundamental issues, from blaming clubs for the ESL to blaming social media for being unable to stamp out racism. And I've yo-yoed between the two, between thinking obviously they need to do more and they can't just blame social media, but also thinking this is them trying to do more, and this is them at least trying to take it and get it removed on one very, very major platform. So I think this is a new thing. It's different. It might work a little better. It might be more effective in getting social media companies to take heed. But the main part for me is that this needs to be only part of the solution. It can't just be about social media, and you can't just pretend that it's about social media. People need to be banned from football, not just stadiums, if it happens. Clubs need to be docked points for the behaviour of their fans. It needs to be just eradicated as firmly as possible. I think, in my mind, it needs to come to the point where even if people are thinking racist ideas, they're too afraid to say them because of the ramifications of what will happen.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think a big part of Ian Wright have talked about, it's a big part of what has maybe emboldened a lot of people to send these messages is that Irish, kid, I think he was 18 years old, sent Ian Wright those messages, got caught, went to court, and there was no real punishment. I think maybe he got a bit of community service or something like that.
Yeah, he got let off, yeah.
So that if you're someone who's thinking about racially abusing Ian Wright, you're going to think, great, there's proof that there's no punishment.
It's like, I've got one free one kind of thing.
Exactly. I do think that there are some good signs, because this is the thing, I agree with you on both counts. I think it's good that there is something being done about it, even if it is performative. Performative is better than nothing, but I do think it's good that there's some stuff being done. I think there were a few funny moments that came out of it as well. Like, I don't know if you saw this, but Mateo Kovacic didn't have a Twitter account prior to this weekend, but he created one just so he could boycott the platform along with everyone else.
Yeah, brilliant. What an ally.
Yeah, great ally. That gave me a good chuckle. And, it is good to see that at least there's something being done. You could tell that a lot of players do actually believe in it. Sterling came out, Rashford came out. They thought it was a good idea. And there have been some positive signs from clubs as well. Very recently, Chelsea issued a 10-year ban to one fan for posting anti-Semitic messages online. And United this week have banned 6 fans for racially abusing Heung-min Son after their game against Tottenham, including 3 season ticket holders and 1 on the season ticket waiting list. So that's great. My only slightly, and I don't want to be a pessimist about it, I just want to be a bit of a realist. The only thing that's slightly, concerning is it's difficult to know how effective these bans will be. From a very anecdotal perspective, I don't know him, but it's a friend of a friend. I know a guy who was banned for life from the Britannia for using some pretty appalling language towards Liverpool fans that I'm not even going to repeat on the podcast. And this same guy still turns up to the games. So whatever checks are in place can't be that effective. I don't know if he uses like a fake ID or something, or he just wears a cap and sunglasses, but there's this guy who's said this very dodgy stuff specifically aimed around Liverpool fans. I'm sure you can infer what it has to do with, and is still going to games despite having been banned for life.
Yeah, obviously it all needs to improve, and that's another way in which, what I was trying to say, it can't just fall to social media. The Premier League and Premier League clubs have fallen short in many ways, and they need to be putting resources and time into this. It can't just be passing the blame.
Yeah, 100%. That's what is the whole thing for me. It's like, this is great if this is step one, but if this is the Premier League going, well, we've done the work and that's it, time to hang up our hat and say, good day, we've defeated racism. Kendall Jenner did the first blow, we did the knockdown punch with the social media blackout. That's it, solved, and we never want to hear about it again.
Definitely. I mean, well, this is a long line of this is part of a long line of conversations about tokenism and how it can affect the game. A lot of players have started to not take the knee because they are worried that it's becoming so performative that nothing else is being done. Clearly, things are still being done and stuff is still being thought about, but yeah, you've got to just keep trying. There's no easy, quick solution to this. It's going to take a lot of work.
It definitely will. But hopefully we're taking a step in the right direction. The pessimist in me says I'm not convinced, but hopefully I'm wrong, and this is the first in a series of very positive steps towards it.
Hopefully, yeah. There was one thing that I wanted to say, just that came out from my perspective from the Alan Shearer and Ian Wright conversation. He was saying that he's often scared to comment or say anything in case he makes a mistake or says the wrong thing. And I understand that. I do. But this is to everyone, whether or not you're Alan Shearer or just someone talking to your mates. If you're scared to say the wrong thing, don't say nothing. Educate yourself. You have so much responsibility to learn.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like, ignorance is not really an excuse in the modern age when everyone has this tiny rectangle that has all of the information in the world on it.
Exactly. Because, as good as Alan Shearer was in that, and as much as I respect him for being willing to have that conversation, I did think, you can always do more.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, lightening us up with a little bit of useless trivia after that somber but very necessary conversation. I've got one connected with the Serie A this week because we were talking about Jose Mourinho at Roma, and obviously Serie A had a very interesting conclusion this weekend where Inter Milan won the league for the first time since 2000 and I think the first time in 11 years, first time since 2010. And I learned a very interesting fact about one of Serie A's up-and-coming talents, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who at 39 is just in the early stages of his promising career, by their metric.
Shows no signs of slowing down.
No, he's a young talent. He's got 15 years ahead of him, and since 2003, Zlatan has failed to finish top of the league in just 3 of the full seasons he's played. And what's interesting about that is, it's impressive stat on its own, but those 3 full seasons were 2011-12, when whilst playing for Milan, he lost out to Antonio Conte's Juventus side. 2016-17, when playing for Manchester United, he lost out to Antonio Conte's Chelsea side, and 2020-21, where, again, whilst playing for Milan, he lost out to Antonio Conte's Inter Milan side.
There you go. the bane of his existence.
Foiled every time by Conte and his glue-on wig.
Do you reckon Antonio Conte could have got the best out of Zlatan Ibrahimovic?
Yeah, I think so. I think he would have, yeah.
Fair enough. Asked and answered. Thank you.
He likes a temperamental striker. He worked really well with Costa. He's worked really well with, not that he's temperamental, but he's a very, he's a striker that several managers have failed to find the best in, Romelu Lukaku, and Conte has definitely found form in him that we haven't seen before anywhere close. We've seen him have good seasons at Everton and West Brom, but here he looks like, pretty third best striker, well, third or fourth after sort of Haaland, Kane, Lewandowski, probably. In the world. Yeah,
good point. Very fair point. I agree with you.
So yeah, I think you'd have handled Ibra quite well. What have you got?
I've got quite a fun little fact about a logo, a crest on a small Irish football side called Drogheda United FC. Their logo involves the often seen in typically predominantly Islamic countries of the crescent moon and the star. Mm-hmm. And it's there because in the Great Famine, Ottomans secretly smuggled food into Drogheda to help support them. So they put it on their logo in gratitude to the Ottoman Empire.
I was going to say, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Drogheder's colours are red and white as well, aren't they? Is that also linked, or is that just a coincidence?
I'm not. I haven't
Well,
seen
it's
that
like a
confirmed.
dark sort of almost clarity red, but
It's a dark red. Yeah, yeah. Pass. Don't know.
all right, fair enough. Finally, wrapping up with a look at some of the European semis. We had the first leg in midweek, and I think all of these games were very interesting because, for me, Rupert, I have a theme that I think unified all of them, and something that we haven't really talked about much on the podcast. Sometimes we talk about momentum, or we talked about in-game management, or these sort of different things that affect what this is in a game, and that's rhythm. And I thought that all of these games had a very interesting, the rhythm of the teams was very interesting in how the teams approach these games. Some teams had a real rhythm that we hadn't really seen with them before. For example, I looked at Edinson Cavani and how a number 9 affected the way that their wingers played. Some teams had a rhythm that was really disrupted. For example, I looked at PSG and how removing Icardi or Keane really disabled the effectiveness of Kylian Mbappe. So I sort of just want to have that as something to keep in your mind, keep in my mind, keep in the listener's mind.
Okay.
And something that I'll call back to a few times. But that's my unifying theme for these games. And shall we start with the tie that was not necessarily the most surprising, but maybe the most interesting in terms of where we could see it going, being Real Madrid versus Chelsea?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a great example of what I would say the unifying factor in all of these is, which is just whether or not teams are able to fully close the door and like take games away from their opposition. And Chelsea, for all intents and purposes, looked like a pretty solid team. They held Real Madrid to very few chances for the first 45 minutes. And if anything, would be upset that they didn't win the game.
Yeah, I think Chelsea were very, very impressive, and it's kind of weird to say that I wasn't that surprised by that, because obviously Chelsea earlier this season, if you took Chelsea, in week 6 in here and you said, what's the score if they play Real Madrid? You'd say, well, anything can happen in football, but probably 3-0 Real Madrid. And here, as you said, everyone was sort of going, Chelsea were unlucky to not win that, win that outright and potentially win it by quite a bit. And what this really reminds me of, and some might say this is a lazy comparison, but I don't, and here's why. I see a lot of similarities to this and the 2011-12 Champions League run that Chelsea had.
On the bandwagon.
No, but I do, because, obviously this is against another Spanish giant in the semi-finals. They played a Portuguese wonder team in the round before, where they played Porto this time, they played Benfica last time. And there are many other similarities. In that season too, Chelsea started off with a manager who sort of was seen as quite a young, promising manager in Andres Villas-Boas, and partway through the season, just sacked him and brought in instead Roberto Di Matteo, and then saw a resurgence of form. Obviously this season Chelsea had Lampard, promising young manager, didn't really work out, and it sort of showcased then and now the effectiveness of Chelsea's brutal revolving door that, you've got no time as a manager. As a result, they've won a lot of trophies over the last 10 years, because if someone's not showing signs early doors, see you later, and usually they bring in someone better. Again, in that season, they were on course after sacking their manager and bringing in a new one to, they won the FA Cup and the Champions League. Currently, Chelsea are, you would have to say, in the advantageous position in their tie and also in the FA Cup final. I think, the other one that I think is kind of funny, and I look forward to this moment if it happens, and if it does happen, or remember to retweet me saying this, that the big moment for Chelsea in that Champions League final, I think for Chelsea fans it's probably Drogba scoring the winning penalty. For everyone else, it's the Fernando Torres and Gary Neville just creaming his pants. And do you know if Chelsea have like a misfiring striker who's been really ineffective this season, who could just use one moment to earn, glory for that club?
Tammy Abraham?
Correct. Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking of. No, well, also, Tammy Abraham had a one-to-one parallel that season in Daniel Sturridge, who was weirdly their top scorer in the league. Which I don't think Tammy Abraham is. I think it's I'm not even sure who it is, but yeah, no, Tammy Abraham was sort of the Daniel Sturridge that season, whereas, you've got Timo Fernando Torres Werner, watch him round the keeper and score to win, that tie. So I think there's a lot of similarities. I don't know if you think that's a really lazy comparison. If it is, hit me up in the comments and tell me I'm being lazy. But I do think there are also a lot of key differences that Chelsea have with that season that could maybe prevent them from winning winning the Champions League this time around. The most obvious difference, obviously, is the strength of the spine. Chelsea had a few rough patches that season, but the spine was Cech, Terry, Lampard and Drogba, which is, to date, one of the strongest spines in modern football history. Whereas now the spine is Edouard Mendy, who's, I would say, a good keeper. I don't know if I would go as far as say great keeper, just because it's not been enough yet. He might continue to build on it. Silva, who's great but a bit old now and has a mistake, and Kante, who's not at his best but still capable of a good game, and Werner, who, as I mentioned, is just not there. Maybe you could throw in Havertz there if he's sort of settling under Tuchel, but either way, it's not quite Drogba territory, is it?
Yeah, I mean, they're not the side they were. However, not to throw fuel on the fires of your metaphors, Tammy Abraham is currently the top goal scorer in the Premier League for Chelsea.
There we go. I didn't know it, but I knew it inside.
I knew it in my heart. When was the last time Chelsea lost to West Brom? Was it 2011-2012 season? Yes, it was. Illuminati confirmed? Maybe.
Illuminati confirmed. It's all the same. Triangle eye. No, I think it's interesting. I think, Chelsea looked really, really good in this first half. I do think that maybe, as with quite a few of these ties, they will regret of not twisting the knife where they could have, because I think, particularly in the midfield, it's just such a big danger area for Chelsea. In the first leg, they were able to dominate possession and did really, really well in the midfield sort of area. But you wouldn't bet against the midfield trio of Modric, Kroos, and Casemiro flipping it on its head in the reverse fixture. They all looked a bit sluggish, and part of that was Chelsea playing really well. But do I see those three who have been so good for so long dropping another goose egg like they did in the first leg? It could happen. I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's this whole discussion of whether or not Chelsea could be the dark horse of the whole competition. I kind of feel like they've missed their moment. I think that you're absolutely right that Real Madrid won't allow themselves to be picked apart in the same way. Chelsea were dominant for so much of that game, but failed to, create enough meaningful chances and convert those chances. So, yeah, I think they carved out a really promising opportunity for themselves and then subsequently kind of like folded their hand.
Yeah, and also, obviously there's that midfield thing. Also, Sergio Ramos is going to be back.
He might be back, but Rafa Varane isn't going to be back. Like, you can give and take all of that, but
I think Ramos is so much more important to that team, certainly as a defender, and I think also just like leadership and everything like that, than anyone else they have at the moment. Personally, though,
True.
I think Varane's good, but he's had an iffy season. But anyway, I did watch that first leg, and there were parts of me that thought, oh, Chelsea could go on and win this 3-0, and then that led me to thinking, when they didn't, I was sat there going like, have they wasted an opportunity here to make it to the final? And maybe not, but
well, yeah, I mean, so often like these like bold tactics that shock teams, it's a sucker punch, and if the sucker punch doesn't knock your opponent down, then they're just going to turn around and batter you if they're bigger than you.
Yeah, exactly. I think it still could be interesting though, and Chelsea have definitely done a lot better than we would expect them to. And just in terms of narrative structure, if it happens, we had our crystal balls here and we predicted it.
We sure did. Well, one of us did. Let's talk about City and PSG.
Yeah, so looking at this tie, it was another really interesting one because City again started without a striker, and much like against Spurs in the Carabao Cup when they didn't start a striker, we saw them floundering for quite a while without a striker. It looked like they weren't going to do so well in the first half. It took until, I think, the 64th minute for them to get a goal. And even though they did run out 2-1 winners, the two goals they did score, the Kevin De Bruyne one was kind of like a freak accident goal, really. I don't think he might have been trying to shoot, but it was one of those. I remember that Bukayo Saka one. He was like, "Of course I was trying to score." I was like, I think.
Well, then collectively the world just went, "Yeah, cool, bro."
Yeah, okay, man. And then the other one was that really, really poor wall from PSG, which is just not really okay in a Champions League semi-final. But both of those goals, I was kind of like, if you take that shot again 10 times. It maybe goes in once. And fortunately today, both the 1 out of 10s have come true, but you can't expect to score those kinds of goals consistently.
Sure. Yeah, I also, again, kind of feel like this is another example of just PSG having been the better side for at least half the game. And
the first half, definitely, yeah.
Not being able to capitalise on it. Unfortunately, yeah, that's just sometimes how football is. You have 2 chances, you score 2 goals, and it's, it's not their year again.
I thought it was weird from PSG that they decided to leave out both Moise Kean and Mauro Icardi. They were both not only subs, but unused subs. And Mbappe was the one who was leading the line. And as good as Mbappe's been this season, you and I mean, we've talked about this a few times, but when we were talking about, him going to City and things like that, for example, we've talked about how throughout his career, he's often, he has this season worked as a lone striker, but I think the best you see him is when he's playing off a sort of further forward striker, like a number 9, and he can operate off the shoulder, and the sort of number 9 can create space for him. And there were definitely at least 2 really notable examples for me where Mbappe got into really threatening spaces on the byline, looked up, tried to cut it back, and there was just no one there to do it. It was either Neymar, who was like behind 2 defenders and just fell over when the ball didn't come to him, or it was no one. And both of those times I was like, if there was someone with a little bit of physical presence who could have sort of told the centre-back to fuck off and got to the ball, they could have, twisted the knife a bit better. Now in the second leg, we've seen the reverse. We look at the 11, and Mbappe, because of a knock, has missed it out on a start while Icardi makes the 11. So it maybe just feels like they've just got it a little bit too wrong. And much like we talked about with Chelsea, maybe thinking they've failed to twist the knife, PSG now have to go to the Etihad, 2-1 down with 2 away goals. And it's not a situation you want to be in. We talked about just before we started recording the podcast about, when we saw the team sheets, okay, Mbappe's out. Well, I suppose then it'll fall to Neymar. And Neymar could do it. He obviously was very key in La Remontada for Barcelona when they had that big comeback season. But he was so anonymous in this game beyond that sort of the first goal they scored. He forced the corner for it. But beyond that, he just didn't really do that much. It just wasn't the kind of performance, you'd be hoping for from the world's most expensive player. So, do I believe that Neymar can put the game on his shoulders and turn around for them in the second leg? Again, it could happen. I'd be a lot more confident. If you had to ask me to choose between PSG missing one of them, Neymar and Mbappe, to help them come back, I would do Mbappe every day of the week.
As in, you think Mbappe's more impactful than Neymar?
If you said to me, like, okay, the rest of the PSG 11, you've got your Icardi, you've got Di Maria, all that, you can only have, for whatever reason, one of Neymar or Mbappe to try and launch this comeback, I'd say Mbappe every single day of the week. I just think Neymar has a tendency to go missing in games like this.
He can do. The only thing I would say to counter that is that I feel like Mbappe works really well as part of a team, and I think that's why he struggles when Icardi isn't there. But if you're looking for someone to produce moments of brilliance, you can't look past Neymar as that talismanic number 10 who can just create something out of nothing. And he did do it throughout the City game, even if he didn't quite manage to have the impact on the score sheet that he would have wanted.
Yeah, there's a part of me, and this might be extremely out of pocket, but that just wants to call him a Brazilian Alan Saint-Maximin, though. Is he fantastic to watch play? Yes. Has he got technical ability coming out of his ears? Absolutely. Is he going to be a reliable goal threat when you need him in these games? He does it sometimes, but then other times, like in this game, you can understand why City are well used to being able to mark strikes out of the game. They had their centre-backs forcing Mbappe wide. You'd have been hoping that it would have been Neymar sort of trying to twist the fullback's blood, or look, I think they had Cancelo at left-back in that game sort of drifting onto that side and sort of going around him, or getting around a little bit of an older Kyle Walker, but instead, he just sort of did nothing really and just was falling over a lot, which is just, again, not to be that guy who's like, oh, a player's price tag defines exactly what they should be and that's what they should stick to, but because, obviously there are loads of players who are bought for loads of money without the fault. Neymar is the most expensive player ever, though, and I don't think he's ever been even close to the best player in the world.
Yeah, I think, I don't disagree with you. PSG paid hand over fist for him, and they got him, and he is what they wanted, which is a really exciting PlayStation player who does thrill fans at times, but doesn't have the presence in the dressing room of I guess the spine you were talking about earlier, like the Drogba or the Lampard or even the Czech.
Well, sort of though, because I think when PSG bought him, obviously I don't know, I'm not in the boardroom at PSG, so I don't know if this is why they bought him. Part of it's going to have been branding, but it seemed to me that the narrative when they bought Neymar was very much like it was at a time when he was getting better year on year, and the conversation had been Messi or Ronaldo, Messi or Ronaldo, Messi or Ronaldo, and it seemed as though the conversation was just about to become Messi or Ronaldo or Neymar, and PSG were getting the player who was going to be part of that conversation, and he just hasn't hit that potential. I don't think he's got better since going to PSG.
Yeah, that's because Liga isn't as much of a It's just not as strong a league, and I know that it's having an amazing time right now with the competition. But competition aside, just the average player is not as strong because there
Also,
isn't.
this is the first year it's been that competitive for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. There just isn't as much money in it. There aren't as many top players. So yeah, I'm not surprised that he hasn't improved because you need to play against the best to get better.
To become the
Um,
best.
so yeah, I mean, I think I will be joining you and probably all other old, boring Premier League fans, and probably Graham Souness as well, in lamenting the real lack of true number nines in the PSG Man City game. Um, moving on to the other half of Europe, Manchester
Uh,
United took Roma apart pretty comfortably.
Yeah, and all, in my opinion, thanks to Edinson Cavani. We just talked about, PSG maybe missing out a big striker, and obviously they had some on the bench, but here's a striker who was playing at PSG in Edinson Cavani. And for me, it comes as zero surprise that United want to hang on to him. All the hallmarks of a number nine. It just shows how important that is to Manchester United's system. As we were talking about that rhythm, when you have these players, instead of sort of running aimlessly around like Martial does, or Bruno Fernandes pinging on through balls to a Rashford or a Greenwood who's sort of isolated and not able to do much with it, Cavani not only is impactful as a forward himself, but creates space for Fernandes to operate into, or the wingers to run in behind. And it feels like the puzzle piece, and it sort of reconfirms to me when we talked a few weeks ago about where Harry Kane could go, and I was like, if United get him, they win the league. I just still think that. I just think that profile of player, and I think it's fair to say that Harry Kane is a better player than Edinson Cavani, but just Edinson Cavani, when he gets a run of games for Manchester United, and when he's in the right kind of game, like he was here, is just able to galvanise that entire squad and turn them into a much more lethal side than they usually are. Because you look at a lot of United's games this season, another thing that we talked about is how many 0-0s they've had. They've not been lethal in all their games, but they were here, 2-1 down, come out in the second half and respond with 5 goals unanswered. That's the definition of lethal.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. I guess, I mean, in some ways, I was looking at this Man U Roma result, and I was just thinking, there's almost the perfect Man U result, apart from the 2 goals conceded. We can talk about that in a sec. But for Bruno Fernandes to get 2, for Cavani, their number 9, to get 2, and to, again, as you said, prove that that's the kind of profile of player they need, and then Paul Pogba to pitch in as someone who's coming back into some vein of form, and then the last 5 minutes, a young player with a lot of ambition to come on and score a goal. I just thought, do you know what I mean? That was a real, there were so many bows wrapped onto that present of a result. The one thing is that, yeah, they conceded 2 to a Roma side that we've both agreed is not particularly hot right now.
Yeah, but they conceded 2, but this is the thing, it's like they conceded 2. I think Roma did play well in this first half, but I think the other thing that's worth commending, obviously I gushed about Edinson Cavani there, we've talked about before whether Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is good enough, and I think that question is still up for debate. But I think the one thing that he has undeniably changed at Manchester United in the post-Ferguson era is how commonly their heads would drop in the face of adversity. A lot of times under different managers following Ferguson, United would be on the end of a bad result and things would just get worse and worse. You could even argue, I think, with games like 6-1 Man City, that one, when the City won the league, that we even saw the start of that at the end of the Ferguson years. But certainly, at least in the Champions League, we've seen quite a few big comebacks from Man United. They had that big comeback against PSG in the Champions League in 18-19, and that was across 2 legs. Here, they were even more efficient, and being 2-1 down at the half at home is not a comfortable position to be in. We're about to talk about, Villarreal Arsenal, who had a really uncomfortable, they're going to be at home with 2-1 to play against, but it's still not a comfortable position to be in. 2 away goals is just not fun, and it'd be very easy to let your heads drop, just like PSG did actually. Probably they're a better comparison than Arsenal. They sort of let their heads drop after Man City started to come alive. United, conversely, came out and didn't just put in a good show and win 3-2. They came out and they went, no, all right, you've had a go, that's fun, we're awake now, and we're going to score 5. And I think that is something that we haven't really seen post-Ferguson until now. So I would give him credit for that.
Yeah, you're right. I think definitely also credit, just to Ole for being given the time to rebuild. And we're seeing, as you said, this is a new brand of Manchester United. This is like a side that has, I guess, come out from under the shadow, hopefully for them, of their past success, and is trying to build something new.
I think just as a sort of a final sort of aside, I was talking earlier about sort of Carl Anker at the United protests and sort of some of the things. I was focusing more on his comments about sort of the nature of the protest, but one of the other things that he pointed out when he was interviewing United fans was that he said that the mood of the fans was resoundingly pro-Solskjaer. Now, they are second place, they are on their way to Europa League final, so that might seem like a no-brainer, but let's just take a second and think about how United fans have been towards their managers over the last 10 years. Mourinho, even when he was winning games, people were booing him out when he won a Europa League and was second. Louis van Gaal, people couldn't wait to get out of the club. David Moyes, people couldn't wait to get out of the club. Maybe the fact that United fans are actually behind Ole Gunnar Solskjaer could be one of the big reasons why he ends up being a success there. Not that I know if he will or not that I'm confident to put my sticker of approval on him, but that could end up being really important, especially with fans coming back into the stadiums next season.
Yeah, I mean, I do completely agree with you. I guess the only thing I would also say is that it takes time to heal wounds, and after Ferguson left, we've talked about how that was a poison chalice. I don't think any manager was going to be able to replace him straight away, and it kind of feels like Solskjaer has just had enough time since Ferguson left for fans to be able to get back on board with him.
Yeah, he's come after the refractory period has ended. I don't disagree with that. Last and indeed least, we come to Arsenal, who faced off against Villarreal, managed, of course, by Arsenal's former manager, Unai Emery. And this was one of those games, before the ball was even kicked off, you could tell it was going to be a bit of an Arteta special, because he decided, for whatever reason, to line up for the first time ever without a striker. Now, what compelled him to do this? To change his system to an as-yet unused shape in a European semi-final?
Channel your inner Pep, my friend.
Only he knows the real reason. But all I could see in my mind's eye when I looked at that lineup was him sort of standing next to Pep Guardiola and Pep being like, you see, yes, you can play with no striker and do all this. And he forgot to tell Arteta, but you need a team worth 800 million.
It's like in the fine print, it's like, this does not work 9 times out of 10.
Listen,
Arteta's like, wait, what?
This is the thing. I think Emil Smith-Rowe's a really promising talent, but for all of Martin Tyler calling him the Croydon De Bruyne, he is not. He's not a 1-for-1 replacement.
This is true, yeah. And that was shown in the fact that it didn't really work.
It didn't really work at all, and, immediately they conceded. Immediately they were sort of all at sea. Again, this sort of Xhaka left-back experiment just shows teams that they can raid Arsenal down that left side if they have any bit of pace. Similarly, down the left side, they had Callum Chambers. And Villarreal have a lot of pace up front. Samuel Chukwueze had one of the most fun nights of his life, I'm sure, just running the ball past fullbacks. And eventually, at a certain point, it became a numbers game. A late penalty for Arsenal has sort of meant the tie isn't over yet, because they now go to the Emirates with an away goal and it's only 2-1. And I think, although they sort of had a man sent off, and so eventually did Villarreal, but they were playing with 10 for a while, they did do well to not concede more. But it was just one of those where the narrative has been like, well, an away goal for Arsenal and it goes to the Emirates, so still very much a winnable tie. And obviously that's true, anything can happen in 90 minutes. But I'd really want to, I examine that statement and I go, 2-1 to Arsenal, you think they're going to overturn the deficit based on how they played in this game? Also, they're at home, where they've lost something like 10 league games this season. It's not exactly a fortress at the moment, the Emirates.
No, it is not. And as we've seen, in European competitions and in domestic competitions, it doesn't really matter anymore, apparently, whether or not you're at home or away, because fans just have so much of an impact on that.
Yeah, exactly. There's no sort of fans unsettling people when they come in or have being at the team's back. Overall, I thought this game was it was a microcosm of Arsenal's season this year under Arteta. This tie and sort of the subsequent final that the winner of this one would reach, so Arsenal in theory, it represents for Arsenal the only salvation they could find this season. This has been a horrible season for them. They may very well finish in the bottom half of the Premier League table. The only thing that could have redeemed this season, and even then it would have still been quite a bad season, would have been to win a European trophy, albeit the less important of the European trophies, but one that they've not won before, qualify for the Champions League, and get something out of the season to bring them back into, you could maybe argue, okay, well, we've had some success. And knowing that, the manager decided to gamble on a new formation, the result of which was unconvincing, unexpiring, and frankly unexciting football.
And also, I guess it feels like vintage Arsenal as well. And this might be harsh, but it feels like vintage Arsenal to not lose so completely that it's all over. Like they're just limping on.
Oh yeah, to leave the fans with a shred of hope before losing 2-0 at home.
It's good stuff, Arsenal. You're nothing if not consistent.
Consistently inconsistent, for sure. Shall we resolve guessing game?
Let's, yeah. So I will read out the clues for you again, and we'll see how you got on. So the first clue is that this player could have been a professional skier before opting to become a professional footballer instead. And his brother plays for Bayern Munich. He played for one club for 15 years before joining a Premier League side towards the end of his career. And he has the 4th most ever caps for Germany. Cameron, do you have a player in mind?
I do, yeah. I actually had 2 players in mind until you said that last clue about, well, all the way up to the end of your last clue. And that's played for one club for 15 years, joined a Premier League club. So for me, when you talk about most ever caps for Germany and play for one club for 15 years, and they've got a brother at Munich, all of that says to me that they probably also played at Munich because that's where they've had a lot of stalwarts. And if you're talking about people who played a lot for Germany and also played a lot for Bayern Munich, I'm assuming it can only really be one of Philipp Lahm or Bastian Schweinsteiger. Now, maybe it's because I can imagine Bastian Schweinsteiger doing the double moguls a little bit more than Philipp Lahm, but also the fact that Philipp Lahm didn't go to any Premier League club, whereas Schweinsteiger did go to Manchester United at the back end of his career for a weirdly, muted and not that notable spell. So that is going to be my guess, Bastian Schweinsteiger.
It is indeed Bastian Schweinsteiger. Well done.
Hey, fantastic.
I was doing my best to mess with you and hide in plain sight. I was hoping that you'd kind of second guess yourself and try to furiously work out who you might have been missing. But no, you're bang on. Bastian Schweinsteiger it was. Bastian Schweinsteiger it is.
Who is his brother at Bayern Munich? Is it just like a reserve player or someone I'm missing? Or is it like the big age gap and it's like a 16-year-old Schweinsteiger?
It's elder. Actually no, sorry, that is a mistake from me. He played for Bayern Munich, but for the reserves. It was his brother Tobias.
That does ring a bell, Tobias Schweinsteiger. Anyway, I'm glad I got that one right because I'm sure I'm about to be hammered savagely in settling the score. Because you had a real week.
I did have a week. It's classic. Every time I think about putting a quid on the results and don't, is the weeks that I start to predict the scorelines bang on. So we start with Palace versus Man City. We both thought this was going to be pretty one-way. And this really could have gone to either of us because I predicted 2-0, you went for 3-0. It ended 2-0, but realistically, it could have been 3. So commiserations to you, 3 points to me. Brighton took on Leeds next, with the final score ending 2-0 to Brighton. We both got it wrong. You called it 2-1 to Leeds. I said it was going to be a 1-1 draw. So I was very slightly less wrong than you. I will take a single point for my very dubious efforts. You pull it back with a correct prediction of a 2-0 Chelsea win against Fulham. I said it would be 3-0. I was wrong. You then took more points. Everton Aston Villa, you said 2-2. It was 2-1 to Villa. Newcastle versus Arsenal. You were actually not close at all, but you were closer than me. You called it 1-1 draw, and I said it was going to be 1-0 to Newcastle. And it was
Neither of us believed in
Arsenal,
which I think is completely reasonable, as for reasons we've just mentioned. But they actually came in clutch against Steve Bruce. Managed to make them look good.
They sure did. Manchester United versus Liverpool. You predicted a very boring match with no goals scored.
Is that technically correct?
No goals were scored. But was it boring? I don't think so. If anything, I would say my 2-0 to Man U really represents the thrilling nature of the weekend fixture.
Well, the fans have managed to score against the Glazers and Sky Sports.
So we'll put that one on ice. We'll come back to it if it ever gets replayed. I'm desperate to give you points, Cam. I know you need them.
Oh God, tell me about
it. You take a third point in a row. Tottenham Sheffield. You called it 3-0. It was 4-0. I said 2-0. So well done. You're scraping it back one by one. Unfortunately, however, you were to receive a double hammer blow on Monday night, as West Brom took on Wolves, drew 1-1. I predicted 1-1, and Burnley lost 2-1 to West Ham, just like I called it. So I will take it 10 points to 6.
The amount, I think there's 5 different results here that I was 1 goal away from getting 3 points on, not including the one I did get 3 points on, but that's the game, I suppose. So yeah, you run out 10-6, and getting to the end of the season are looking in pole position to win it, unless I can win every single one of our last weeks.
Well, sometimes, Cam, it do be like that. And so for those of you wondering what the punishments will be or the rewards will be, the first is that Cameron will be very kindly contributing some money towards us going to watch a match together. The full details of which match we'll be watching yet to be discussed. I will be providing the beer.
Well, or if I lose, I'll be providing the money for the season tickets. Don't discount the remontada.
Did I not say that? Did I? Did I say when?
You said well. I think you meant if.
I must have meant if. My apologies. The loser will have to do that, and the winner will buy the beers. So time will tell.
I think that about wraps us up for this week. Rupert, great to talk to you as always, and let's get off to watching the Man City game.
Cam, thank you, and thank you to everyone at home for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Cheers, guys. Bye.